Hey friends, Kate from Venison for dinner here, and today's video is all about our wood cook stove because you guys are blowing up my messages and comments on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. You want to know all about this stove. You want to know the pros and cons, and you want to know the brand and the specs. And honestly, we had a hard time finding that stuff when we were shopping for this video, shopping for this stove. So we're gonna bring you that video. First, let's get a cup of coffee and sit down. Hey, kitty, kitty, kitty.
You go see what Amy's
like. I'll read on the couch. Can we read on the couch?
No, you can sit on my lap here. Once upon a time, there was a frog called Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He lived in a little damp house amongst the buttercups at the edge of a pond. So we bought a Heco 520 cook stove. This is made by DS Stoves in, I think, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We bought this through Good to Go Co., which is out of Kelowna, British Columbia, and we're in northern British Columbia. So it was nice to deal with someone that we knew we wouldn't have import fees and that sort of thing, so the shipping was more straightforward. It's still, so I'm going to be talking all in Canadian dollars, and I'm going to be transparent with numbers even though that feels kind of vulnerable to do. I'm going to explain the cost of putting this thing in, okay? The reason we chose a Heco 520 is for a few different reasons. Number one, I wanted a glass door. So the oven's pretty, the firebox is pretty low right now, so you can't hardly see the fire. But it's a glass door, so I can see what's going on in there. I wanted an oven that fit lots. Like, this is a giant turkey roaster in there, and it's not even taking up the whole oven. It's slow cooking chicken broth right now. I have, ooh, something crashed upstairs. I have 4 racks, and I can put 4 cookie sheets in there. Like, a cookie sheet fits in that way beautifully. And actually, a cookie sheet even fits in like long ways that way. We went with a new wood cook stove over a vintage one, even though this one cost $10,000 to get it here. By the time we bought it, we bought a couple additions for it, which I will talk to you about. And the shipping was almost $1,000 to get it freighted up here. We could have bought a vintage wood cook stove for a lot cheaper, but friends, vintage wood cook stoves are not actually a very good source of heat for your house. This is an airtight wood stove. This thing easily runs overnight in below freezing weather. We wanted something that was a genuine heat source for our house, not just for cooking and baking. You can buy a base model from DS Stoves, but Good to Go Co. only carries a premium one, which has, these are called warming ovens. And I wanted them because they are so handy for keeping things hot. This side is warmer than this side. I'll explain that in a little bit. The polished steel top was another, that's a more premium one, versus there's the one that's like a few panels. Glass oven door and glass wood box door. Those all come together to make it the premium model. I bought extra, a couple racks, which I'm really glad I did. The other thing we bought extra, which we didn't necessarily need to do because of how we installed, but it wasn't expensive, is this heat shield. This heat shield makes it so that you can be closer to a wall. But then because of how we did things with the tile and the installation, that ended up being redundant, but it was only a $150 part, so I'm glad we just got it anyways and didn't regret not getting it. Now, we had to put in a 26-foot chimney, friends. 26-foot chimney, because it had to go up through a bedroom, through the attic, and then the clearance. There's this whole math on our building code on the clearance that, depending on the pitch of your roof, is how, it's hard to explain. We ended up actually making it like 2 feet longer than we needed to. The inspector ended up saying we could have taken the chimney down by 2 feet. He was like, if you want to return it since it's not used, and the insulated chimney, it wasn't just double walled, but insulated. It's really expensive, but the last section was 3 feet and we only could take it down 2 feet. So we would have then like had to take it down and like get another piece and whatever. And Marius was like, I'm not getting back up on that roof. We're fine. We'll swallow the cost. Last thing about the chimney before we get into more stuff with the stove. We ended up going with, so it's double walled until it hits the ceiling. It's double walled until it gets to there, and then it goes insulated. And this because then our clearances aren't as big. We would have had to do like huge clearances in the bedroom and through the attic and everything. So while the insulated chimney costs more than the double walled chimney, we save in time and space elsewhere. Now we're gonna chat some details about the stove before we get into the tiling and such. So, okay, last thing is that the chimney and all the chimney parts cost $4,000 Canadian. So that was a huge chunk of change, friends. A lot of wood cook stoves are only rated to heat more like 2,000 square feet, and this one is rated to heat 2,500 square feet, which is the square footage of our house excluding the basement below us. So we had a pretty good bet that it could heat our whole house so that we could use this or the furnace and we wouldn't be running both of them at the same time unless it was really cold. And we have a Blaze King Apex wood furnace in our basement. We wanted a different source of heat in our house, which is why we even made this not small investment. Ended up being a bigger investment than I originally intended, but we wanted a heating source that didn't need electricity because this fall our furnace had an issue that put us without heat for days. All because a light shorted out the entire system, and it took days to troubleshoot what was even shorting out the system, like by a professional. So that was pretty intense. When that happened, Marius was actually hunting and away, and it was stressful. And when he got home, he was like, order that wood cook stove you've always dreamed of. I'll figure out how to put it in. Because this is ridiculous that we live in such a cold climate and something so simple could put us without heat. And we were fortunate it was mild fall. We have been pleasantly surprised. We thought we would go through more wood having 2 wood burning appliances. This thing uses a fraction of the wood, and our wood furnace makes our basement warm and our bedrooms are all warmer, but the living areas are comfortable, but they're not like cozy. This makes our living areas really cozy, and our bedroom and our basement and our bedrooms and our basement is just storage, are cooler, and that's good. We actually like that more, to have that flipped so that the main living areas are where we're super cozy and the rest is cooler. Now, pros and cons. let's go there. Pros, big firebox. We can fit 18-inch logs in here. I'm gonna open it up and show you in a minute. Big oven, I can bake lots in there. Long burn time. Hi, Amos. More pros include, I have the warming ovens, I have a huge cooktop. Some people would say you could cook right on top, like fry tortillas right on the surface, but I feel like the flour would burn off and be funny. So overall, I'm very happy with it. There is a few cons that I want to run through. And I will say we're only burning wood. It also can burn anthracite coal, but we don't actually have that available to us. I do have a friend in the States that would like to get one and use coal in it because they use a coal heater otherwise. So if you have a Heco and you use it with coal, I would love if you could leave a comment so that I could share with my friend your experience using coal. I would say the number one con is that if you're not careful in how you open the wood box, you will get smoke. So I always open the wood box by opening, this is the ash pan, you can see the ash pan there. So I always open this a crack to increase the draw. And then I open this a crack. And then I come around the corner to where we store our firewood and grab, we just store a little bit of firewood here. Grab a chunk. And by the time I'm back with the firewood, the draw is good and I won't smoke. I won't have smoke coming into the house while I open this. As far as sturdiness, while it is a beautiful stove, I feel it's also built for sturdiness. However, there's a couple things. The paint is already chipping here and I'm not sure why, because this isn't a heavy wear area. We don't hang anything from there or anything. Whereas this, I hang the fire poker here and the paint is chipping there. So there is that. I think no matter the stove you have, it gets dusty. Like I just wiped it down when it was cool the other day, but it still gets dusty and dust collects behind here too. You can see on the back of this here. I didn't feel like I gave you a good idea of how big the wood box is. So 18-inch logs that way. And then if I'm using rounds that are 6 to 8 inches in diameter, I can easily stack like at least 4. Like you can stack quite a few in here. Another silly con with any wood cook stove is that you easily roast yourself out of your house, friends. If you're not managing the heat on it properly and it's not cold in your house, you're gonna be warm. You know that song, I'm not gonna say the inappropriate parts of the song, but it's like, to the window, to the walls, till sweat drips down, you know? I think the person who wrote that, they have a wood cook stove in their kitchen. So my list of cons is not very long, but friends, we've only used this for a couple months. I think one of the biggest frequently asked questions is like, are you gonna get rid of, hey, you too, just enjoy your hot chocolate, okay? Are we going to get rid of our propane cook stove? Friends, why would we get rid of our propane oven? Like, we're not gonna use this in summer? No way. We're gonna be cooking outside on our Blackstone griddle, or I'll just bake in the regular propane oven. We don't run this all day, every day, but I'm gonna run you through a flow of if we were running it all day, how would we manage it? As well as how do you manipulate heat when you want to cook or bake at high temperatures, and explaining kind of the heat flow, which is very intuitive once you get to know it. When I wake up in the morning, I always look, is the fan still going? If the fan's still going, then we know we got some coals. We open this up because there's two different dampers. So this one is closed overnight and we open this up and then we go around behind. So this dial opens up this one here at the back. So this is the one that you're gonna use during the day to manipulate heat. This one stays open all the time unless you want to have the stove closed right down. So once I've done those in the morning, then I open this to get it flowing. And then I open to see, oh, how much do I have for coals?
Why is this down here?
In the morning, the house is chillier. I want to get this thing roaring. I have both dampers wide open. I'm gonna load it with smaller pieces, more like 4-inch diameter and smaller, because small pieces create a hotter fire, which creates a hotter stove. So they won't burn as long, but they'll get the top up to temperature faster so that I can boil water for tea and make coffee and get breakfast going. And because of that, as a result, the oven also goes up to temperature a lot hotter. The gauge shows about 50 degrees cooler than it is inside the oven. And if we picture the firebox and then the heat flows out the chimney, right? The very hottest spot is right under that flame. Hotter, cooler, coldest, warmer again, right? Just picture the firebox and the chimney. So then when you think about the oven, the hottest part is on this side and at the top. Coolest point, bottom over here. Right now the oven is sitting at about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about what it sits at when the fire is just at its, you know, simmering away, maintaining temperature in here. The top is not stinking hot. You wouldn't be able to boil water anytime soon on top. You know, frying an egg would be very slow. This is a slow oven, if you're going for old school terms. But when we're getting it roaring in the morning, the oven easily sits at 350, 400. So this is why I find for us before 10 o'clock in the morning is the best time for me to bake things. So whether that's because I did an overnight sourdough and then shaped it first thing in the morning and then, you know, bake it at about 9 in the morning, or I mix up some muffins, or I bake something for breakfast, before 10 a.m. is the best time for me to bake things at a higher temperature without roasting our house out. At that point, I'm closing dampers, I'm putting a bigger log on that's not gonna do as hot as a fire, but it's gonna burn longer, and it's gonna just simmer away for the rest of the day. Later in the day, you know, the house is cooled down some because the fire isn't, you know, we're no longer tropical in here. I already had coffee, yeah. So we're no longer tropical in here, but we're comfortable. So it's later in the day and I'm gonna cook something for dinner, and you know, maybe I'm wanting to get the house a bit warmer before bedtime because there is heat loss overnight when the stove is dampered right down. So this is the other good time when it makes sense for me to bake bread. And if you're in a good rhythm of, like, you had a sourdough levain or overnight and you mixed up a dough in the morning and you shaped it after lunch, it's gonna be ready to bake dinner, evening time, and naturally your oven is hotter at that point. Or if you're baking a yeasted bread, you know, mix it up after lunch, mid-afternoon, so that it's ready to bake about dinner time. So these are the natural flow of the day when the oven for us is hotter, and it makes sense for us to bake with it without roasting ourselves out. People talk about burning things in wood cook stoves. Friends, I have trouble browning things. It runs so efficiently with even heat that, like, I have to work to brown something, especially something that is like buns that only bake for 15 minutes. They just barely brown. Even like I baked a pan on the top rack the whole time till they were done, and they were only just kind of browning and more around the edges. This doesn't bother me. They're still baked well, but it's just something to keep in mind. So this side of the oven is really just keeping warm. So this is maintaining the temperature of my lemon tea, and I have my kettle. And if I wanted to boil it, I'd move it over to here. Same as I want the steam, you know, actively going. If it actually started bubbling, then I would move it over here. This is to put humidity into the air. But you know, if I didn't want it to be steaming so much, I'd put it over here. And it would slow right down. This oven also has what's called bake mode. So when you pull this out, it diverts the smoke. Instead of going out, it goes around. And this makes it act like a convection oven. With a wood cook stove, the heat doesn't bounce back as fast as like an electric or a propane oven. So, you know, when you open up the oven to switch around or like to put something in, I'm definitely aiming for it to be a little hotter than I want it to be because I'm accounting for some heat loss. So if, you know, right now it's at about 300 Fahrenheit. If I wanted to bake cookies, I should be careful what I speak because the little children are gonna holler about baking cookies. Before I started mixing the cookies, I would open up the dampers and load it up with some smaller pieces of wood, like 3-inch diameter type things. By the time I was ready to put the cookies in the oven, you know, 20 to 30 minutes tops, the oven will be up to temperature. At 300 right now, it's not gonna take much to be there, but if it was lower, it would take probably the full 30 minutes. While I can fit 4 trays of cookies, I definitely find it bakes best with 2 trays of cookies at a time, just in terms of like browning them and not having to turn trays around so much. When I go to put whatever I'm baking in the oven, I then will throw another couple pieces of small diameter wood in to just keep it staying at that temperature. And then when I put another round of cookies in, I might put another 1 piece in, just maintaining that small hot fire. To bake successfully or cook successfully with a wood cook stove, I think you can't be hung up on oven temperatures and cooktop temperatures. You have to embrace the slow and fast method. So, you know, maybe cookies normally bake at 350, but actually my oven is running more at like 375. I just have to look and know when they're done. You have to have a feel for when things are done. If I'm going to bake something in the oven, I will often start it on top, get the pan warm, and then like I did a cast iron pan lasagna. I put the pan, and it came from the fridge. I put it on the stove top first until the pan was hot, and then I moved it to the oven so that I didn't, first of all, I needed time for the oven to come up to a hotter temperature, and also I wasn't putting this super cold big pan into my hot oven, which would plummet my oven temperature. So I grew up with an Aga cook stove. You've probably seen one, like Ballerina Farm has one. I have no desire to have one of those because if you run them on propane, we don't have natural gas where we live. On propane, it is hundreds of dollars a month to run them. So it doesn't feel like anything sustainable to us to have. But the way you cook with Aga is like if you're cooking rice, you would start it on top and then you would move it to an oven to finish off. So that you do embrace that to a certain extent with this as well. Like start a stew on top and then move it to the oven. So there's that rhythm to things as well. And when it comes to cooking, like you're making a sauce, you know, you add your butter to the pan and the butter's like sizzling really hot. You know that pan is hot. The butter is like only just melting. Well, you know you're probably more like a low heat. Do you need it higher? Well, can you move the pan somewhere hotter, or are you already at the hottest point? If you're already at the hottest point, well, is your damper open all the way? Do you need to throw a little piece of wood on to increase the fire heat? You have to have some intuition when it comes to cooking and baking to cook with a stove that you can't just set it to medium and go for it. Stuff we have around the wood cook stove right now. We have a kindling box. I have a bag of books my mother-in-law brought that they're not for burning. They got put by my reading chair. This is my coffee table. So this is the warmer side of the stove. This is definitely cooler over here. So on the cooler side, I have a couple plants. I'm seeing how they do here. I definitely have to water them more often. And then we have a couple, 3 buckets of honey that were crystallized. So we just have them here gently softening. We have the laundry rack here because we put the laundry, we'll just pull the chair forward and put the laundry rack there. We did have the otter there, but the otter is moved to Mac's room for now. Marius has debated putting a countertop there. I don't mind just using the table as the workspace, but he would like to have a countertop there. So he might do that, but I do like that we can hang laundry here that is out of the way, because even though that's the warmer side, I only like to hang laundry there if I'm in a rush. Also, wow, the floor is chaos over here, friends. Welcome to 7 people who live here all the time. Marius is out checking the trap line, and the oldest 3 are at piano lessons, so I thought I would film this while it's quiet in here. The last thing I want to talk about is the slate and the installation of it. So we picked a slate tile because Marius wanted a natural rock. The slate ended up being really difficult to deal with. Super fun, super fun. They are not perfectly square and they're not all the same thickness. That was really hard for Marius because he is a carpenter who likes square and level things. So for the wall, he took off the drywall because, you know, walls only have studs and he needed to put this concrete backer board here. So he took the drywall off and then he put boards going horizontally across the studs and then put the vapor barrier back on and then put the drywall back on and then put the concrete backer board, to which he tiled on top of the concrete backer board. He is going to do a trim around it. The really fun part is that because they're not all the same size, it makes the trim more tricky, so I think he's still just thinking on how he's doing that. For the floor, he actually took the linoleum up off of this section because he wanted to see the shape and like what the underneath the linoleum looks like. So he scraped the linoleum and all the glue off of this section, and then he put a chunk of plywood, which you can't even see, and then he put the concrete backer board, and then he attached the tile to it. So there's often this like orange membrane that you put on to between the backer board and the tile so that it doesn't crack. But it didn't want to stick. And he has dealt with this stuff multiple times. It's not his first rodeo tiling, and it didn't want to stick. And he was having a lot of frustrations because the tile saw he had rented didn't work, and the tile was not the dimensions that it said on the box, and any other time he's tiled, the dimensions it says on the box is what the actual tile is, whereas like he knows a 2x4 is not actually 2 inches by 4 inches, but the slate tile was not what it said on the box, and that messed up some of his measurements, and he like maths everything out when he's doing a building project, and so when that membrane didn't stick, it got thrown in the garbage. So we didn't do that. This, I can't remember where we got the tile, the supplier of it, but the color is California Gold. And we used a charcoal grout because we felt that it would just kind of blend in nicely. I liked the rusty tones to some of it. And like you can see here how uneven the tiles are. But we like it for the rustic like this. We would not love it in our entire house. I narrowed down, like Marius told me, just pick whatever tile you want. I narrowed down to 3 tile colors that I liked. And with slate tiles, obviously there's a lot of variation, right? They're not actually just one color, which I like that. I love that. So I narrowed down to 3, and 2 of them were a bit glossy, just naturally that slate was glossy, and this was matte. And Marius said, I want matte, I don't want gold, I don't want glossy. And I couldn't pick between the 3, so I had said, you pick, and he goes, well, I don't want glossy. The 2 are glossy, we'll pick the matte one. So I'm glad we did. To buy all the tiling supplies, but not the concrete backer board and the plywood. The tiles, the grout, the mortar, which is what you stick it with, and like he bought spacers for such, and that was $1,000 Canadian. So we're at $10,000 for the stove, $4,000 for the stovepipe, $1,000 for the tiling supplies, and then he did have to buy some lumber to install the chimney. In order to get up there, he had to build a platform, but that can be reused, and I can't remember the cost. He did end up spending $500 on a harness for safety, because he went up on the roof once and he came down, he's like, I'm gonna kill myself up there. And I was like, go buy a harness, I don't care what it costs, you're worth more. Like, you know, your safety and peace of mind is worth a lot to us. And he can use that for other things, or he can lend it to one of his brothers who needs to use something, right? So there's that. There was a tool or 2 he bought that they were ones that he'd been wanting to buy, but hadn't had a real good reason to buy them, so we used them as an excuse to buy. So probably at the lumber store, between wood and tools and harness, we spent $2,000 to $3,000. That is not all like sunk and tied into this, right? We have tools, we have wood that will be used elsewhere. But as you can tell, this was not a cheap project. The inspection cost, I think, around $200. I can't quite remember. Anyhow, that's what it cost us to do it ourselves. Someone told me they didn't tile, they bought a cheaper stove, they picked it up themselves so they didn't have to do shipping, but they had to pay for the installation, and they had a shorter chimney, and it still cost them $19,000 Canadian. So we did save a lot of money doing it ourselves, especially with the tile. We had debated just doing a concrete backer board and not getting fancy with the tile, and then Marius was like, you know what, if we can swing it to spend the extra $1,000 to do the tile, I think it will make a huge difference, and we'll just love it. And also it acts as a heat sink. Having the rock that absorbs heat, like, it is so warm in front of there, so that's residual heat that it lets go after the stove cools down. And I'm really glad we tiled, even though it was a major headache with some bad words involved. We have occasionally used our wood furnace, but now we've mostly just been using this when we need heat, which has been awesome. And I just pulled out my computer because I've been meaning to look at our hydro bill, because it shows you this year versus last year, and I want to see if we are using less power, because our furnace uses electricity even though it's a wood furnace. Let's see here. Propane, we're pretty sure we're using less, but we don't have an exact metric on that. January 2nd or 3rd, we switched over to a new 100-pound tank. On average, we would last 2 to 3 months with a propane tank, 100-pound tank for our wood, for our propane oven. So we'll see how long that lasts. We're pretty sure it's gonna last a lot longer. This is our last 30 days. So we've been using it just over 30 days. But last year's consumption is dark blue, this year is light blue. So you can see the difference in power consumption. There's only, this day we used a lot more. Wonder why. Anyhow, point being, our average power consumption is way lower, and that is going to result in savings in our bill for sure. So our power bill is every 2 months, and so it has a month of our regular consumption before the wood cook stove, and then a month of it without the wood cook stove. So I'll be interested more to see what next bill will be, to see if it's a lot cheaper than last year. Okay. Yeah, that was coming today.
They're done.